Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm excited to share the story of how I added the king of anthuriums, the anthurium Veitchii, to my aroid collection. In 2022, my collection only had 2 anthuriums, and since I wasn't having any issues with them, I felt confident about caring for more. Around that time, anthuriums were becoming a huge trend in Europe, and I couldn't resist the urge to get my hands on the king and queen of anthuriums. And of course, Anthurium Veitchii, known as the king, was at the top of my list. I managed to find a local private seller who had what I was looking for, a very special type of Anthurium Veitchii called narrow form. The narrow version has more compact, ribbed leaves, which I immediately fell in love with. It was so rare, I'd only ever seen it in a few photos online, but I knew I had to have it, even if it meant paying more than the usual price for a regular large-leafed Veitchii. The package arrived in winter 2022, and I was thrilled. One thing about living in Germany is that winters can be quite mild for a few weeks, with nighttime temperatures hovering around -2 degrees Celsius to -6 degrees Celsius. This makes it possible to ship tropical plants even during the winter. When my Anthurium Veitchii arrived, the seller had packed it really well, multiple layers of paper, bubble wrap, and a 72-hour heat pack attached to the bottom. I was really happy with the way it was packed. The plant arrived safe and sound with 2 healthy leaves in a 12 cm pot. I decided to pot it in a special aroid pot. I hadn't used this type of pot before, but with all the extra aeration from the numerous holes, I thought it would be perfect for aroids. But, in this video, I'll explain why I've stopped using these pots for my aroids. The principle of air root pots, or root pruning pots, is based on enhancing root development in plants through active root pruning. When roots reach the openings and come into contact with air, their tips dry out. This stimulates the growth of new, denser roots closer to the base of the plant, rather than long roots circling around the pot. As a result, the plant develops a stronger and more branched root system. I added a homemade aroid mix to the bottom, which I make by combining ingredients like coconut chips, perlite, leaf mold, pine bark, charcoal, and ground cinnamon. It's full of aerators and natural disinfectants. I also water the mix with mycorrhizae, which helps beneficial fungi grow on the roots and makes it easier for the plant to absorb nutrients. However, it turned out the 12 cm pot was too small for my anthurium, so I ended up assembling a larger pot in the same way. I don't completely remove the moss from the roots since they're tightly embedded, and I don't want to damage them. However, this moss ball poses a certain risk of rot, as it doesn't dry out as easily as the surrounding substrate. Now, a few months later, you can see how the plant looks in its medium-sized pot, with its first new leaf unfolding beautifully in my conditions. The plant settled in really well, despite being repotted in January. I didn't use a terrarium or greenhouse, I just kept it on a table by a south-facing window with a grow light alongside my other plants. As you can see, the holes in the pot allow for excellent drainage, and the substrate stays in place. I water from above, and the pot sits in a tray, but I don't drain the excess water because the bottom of the pot doesn't touch the water. It works perfectly. As you can see, everything looks fine, but then I noticed a root tip peeking out from a hole in the pot's side. I became curious about how it would develop further. In the background, you can spot the queen of anthuriums, Anthurium veroquinum, and right below her, my king, this Anthurium Veitchii. Now that the plant has grown, I can say with certainty that it's not the narrow form as I originally thought. It's actually the regular form with large leaves and less ribbing. I've let the leaves grow naturally, without tying them to a pole, and they've spread out like helicopter blades, taking up nearly 2 square meters of space in my room. Now, something interesting about this plant is that it's hard to tell when they're young whether it's the narrow or regular form. Either the seller didn't know what they were selling, or maybe it was an intentional mix-up. It's not easy to determine the exact form of Anthurium Veitchii at a young age, and as it grew, I realized it's definitely the regular form. To make the pot look better, I added a ground cover plant, Pileia glauca, to hide the plastic pot, which I don't find very visually appealing. Since I didn't use a pole or tie the stems to support them, I let my Anthurium Veitchii grow naturally. And, as any true king would, it took over its surroundings. Right now, it spans about 1.5 meters in height and width. While air root pots do offer some advantages, I've noticed several drawbacks that are worth considering. First, maintaining the right humidity indoors can be challenging. When you see the root tips drying out where they stick out of the pot, it's tempting to water the plant, but the soil inside may still be damp, which risks overwatering. Another drawback is the limited soil volume. Air root pots often hold less soil than traditional pots, which can restrict the plant's access to nutrients and moisture, especially for larger plants that require more. Additionally, air root pots tend to be more expensive than regular pots, which is something to think about if you're trying to keep gardening costs down. The open design can also expose roots to temperature fluctuations, causing stress that can slow down growth. And in humid conditions, exposed roots can even encourage algae growth, which isn't ideal for the plant's health. Considering these downsides is essential before choosing air root pots for indoor plants. For a while, everything was fine, but after a year, the anthurium's leaves began to turn yellow. The roots weren't growing in the holes of the pot, and their tips were drying out. In a regular pot, the roots would have started coiling along the sides, extending to nourish the plant. I decided to repot my anthurium into a regular pot like the ones all my other plants grow in, including aroids such as alocasias, philodendrons, caladiums, aglaonemas, and dieffenbachias. I'll show the repotting process from the air root pot to a regular pot and the results of the repotting in the next video. Subscribe to my channel and give my king a like.